So tonight I want to talk to you about how the past leaves traces. And I don't just mean in the form of documents, landmarks, and family stories, but I also mean in the term of restless spirits. You do not have to believe in ghosts to enjoy this talk. You just have to believe in history, which I'm sure a lot of you will agree can be even scarier. So a little bit about me. I work in parapsychology, and that is a fancy academic term for paranormal research. So when people ask me what I actually do, I usually say I'm a researcher or I'm a consultant. And that's because it's a lot easier than saying that I'm an investigator, researcher, data analyst, historian, journalist, therapist, technical writer, and network coordinator. And unfortunately, paranormal investigator has become synonymous with ghost hunter due to a lot of the media coverage, but really there is a difference. Ghost hunting is a bit of a hobby or an entertainment thing. It's something that a lot of venues will offer as an experience. A ghost hunter is exactly how it sounds. It's a person who goes into a location for the primary purpose of finding and hopefully communicating with a ghost. A paranormal investigator is much more in-depth and usually has more training, more experience. A paranormal investigator is a person that enters a location for the purpose of diagnosing and hopefully resolving claims of unexplained activity. There's varying levels. Paranormal investigators like myself are certified through the Rhine. We do a lot of work with media consulting. We do work with research projects. We do work with teams all throughout the US. Some of us work with organizations and institutions like universities to help further research under the paranormal realm. So when somebody hears the word paranormal, to say something's paranormal simply means it's not normal. It does not mean it's supernatural, and it's not all about ghosts. In fact, I know some people who could be classified as paranormal. Much of what we label paranormal actually has rational scientific explanations. And unfortunately, with the media itself, paranormal tends to get grouped in with Bigfoot and aliens. So parapsychology is actually a much deeper interdisciplinary field. It's separate from ufology and cryptozoology, and it deals a lot more with consciousness, thus the psychology part. It deals with things like ESP, psychokinesis, hypnosis, remote viewing, and disembodied consciousness. And those are your out-of-body experiences, your near-death experiences, and those are also your ghosts. So, contrary to what some people will tell you, parapsychology is not a pseudoscience. It absolutely meets the statistical criteria for a mainstream science. However, there are a lot of even institutions that'll teach that it's a pseudoscience, and there's a lot of information on it being a pseudoscience online because it conflicts with a lot of people's dogmatic beliefs. If it doesn't fit with their beliefs, it can't be real, there can't be anything to it. But really, parapsychology it's been around for a very long time. It's absolutely a legitimate field with over a century and a half of progress and the support of major institutions like the University of Virginia, Princeton, UCLA, and one of my favorites, Cornell. A lot of people don't know this. Cornell University released a study in 2011 that proved the existence of extrasensory perception. So that was a mainstream publication, and it was groundbreaking. That was exciting. Whoa. Everybody else see that? So, but yeah, it was groundbreaking research, and it's very fascinating. And I do highly recommend, if you're into that kind of thing, look up Dr. Daryl Bem's research. And also we have my personal favorite right now, and that is something, it's paranormal. Oh no, there we go, okay. We have my personal favorite, Duke University, home of the Rhine Research and Education Centers. The Rhine Research Center is the nation's leader in parapsychology, in parapsychological research, and in the education. And more importantly, it is also my alma mater. So, right now you're probably thinking, what does this have to do with history? And I'm here to tell you everything. A huge part of my work involves digging into the history of a location, of an event, and of the people involved in order to either confirm or completely disprove the stories behind unexplained phenomena. And history can even provide critical clues as to the cause of that activity. Now, my own organization, ParaAtlas, we're founded for the sole purpose of maintaining a database of locations that have reputed paranormal activity, and we compile accurate, documented history on those locations. So just think of Ancestry for haunted houses. Now, unfortunately, due to paranormal entertainment in the form of movies, television shows, books, and tourism, true histories of people, places, and events, they're being distorted. Despite all of our technology, we are playing a never-ending game of telephone with our past. We tend to care more about the drama than the documentation. We end up slandering innocent people, many of whom are long gone and can no longer defend themselves. And we twist or invent events to support a narrative that's simply not true. It's easy to think that it's happening out there, and especially on TV, but the truth is it is happening right here in our backyard. There is a new tour company in town, and full disclaimer, it is absolutely not True Tours. Stick with True Tours. But there's a new tour company in town that is spreading a lot of stories that people are getting excited about. They're basically saying Edgar Watson is stalking the streets of Fort Myers at night. There's even been reports of him chasing people out of Fort Myers Cemetery. And hopefully that's local law enforcement, not local serial killers. There's a story of bathtubs filling with blood in the Burroughs home. And there's also the story of two men that they haunt the courthouse because they were hanged for crimes they did not commit. So if you know your history, that's a huge red flag. We've actually, I mean, as a city, officially, we've only ever hung one person, and he earned it. So right now I do want to show you a really big example, a great example. Some of you here may have seen the movie The Conjuring, or one of its many, many sequels and spinoffs. The major appeal to the Conjuring franchise is that it is based on a true story. And this is, I mean, that's true, but the problem is that disclaimer, based on a true story, is extremely vague. It's just that, it's based on it. Now, in the movie The Conjuring, you have Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were real investigators. They go into the Perron family's farmhouse to investigate these claims, and, you know, no spoilers, but yay, they saved the family. In truth, they did go into the Perron family farm to investigate, ended up getting in a fist fight with Roger Perron, and were kicked off the property. So, I mean, that would have been a very short movie if it was really true events. But the problem with the original Conjuring movie is that it uses a woman by the name of Bathsheba Sherman. Now, this woman was a Satan-worshiping witch who sacrificed infants, and then she hung herself on the parent family property because it was her property, and that was part of a curse to forever keep people off of her land. She returned in the 1970s to torment the parent family as an evil spirit. Now here's the problem. Bathsheba Sherman was a real woman. That's the real one, not this one. Bathsheba Sherman was a real woman who lived on a farmhouse. I mean, it was nearby the parent family farm, but it was not the same property. She just lived nearby. That is her only crime. She lived a peaceful life with her family. She was not a Satan-worshiping witch. She was actually a lifelong devout Baptist. By all accounts, she was a normal woman. Now, here's the problem. Since the movie came out, a lot of people, and trust me, this movie was popular, a lot of people have taken it upon themselves to punish her for her evil deeds by destroying her gravesite. First of all, I mean, unless she's there and having to clean up herself, I don't think you're really punishing anybody. So her descendants and the local historians have had to take extra measures to not only protect her grave and the graves around them, but also to clean up after the people who have been getting in, clean up after the people who think they're seeking justice. And this right here, this is a perfect example of why our history matters. When history is ignored or twisted, it doesn't just create ghost stories. It damages real people's reputations, it damages their families, and it damages their communities. Our responsibility as historians and investigators is to separate the fact from the fiction, to protect the truth, and to give respect to those who came before us. Now that we've covered a little bit about parapsychology and the history involved, I'm going to get to the reason you're really here, the ghost stories. So I'm actually going to start a little bit off of our coast at a popular destination for treasure hunters. This is Cayo Palau. It's located in Charlotte Harbor, and it actually straddles the border of Lee and Charlotte counties. And you would think this nice little tropical destination would be fought over, but no, neither county will take responsibility for it. It's just kind of out there. To most, it looks like any other stretch of mangroves and sand and water, but beneath that tropical beauty lies one of Florida's most infamous legends. And that is the story of pirate Jose Gaspar, or Gasparilla. Real quick, just making sure we don't have any audience too young, just because this particular story is rated R. Not ashamed. According to legend, Cayo Palau was once a home to a rough settlement called Lowtown. And this is where Gaspar's crew would hang out when they weren't terrorizing the Gulf. And Lowtown had it all. They had a general store, they had a graveyard, they had a blacksmith, they had a doctor, they had merchant warehouses where they would store their loot. They had blacksmiths, saloons, and there was about 40 or 50 shacks out there where these men could rest until their next voyage. Meanwhile, Jose himself preferred a little more refined lifestyle.
I guess so.
At least I'd like to imagine that was his. So he is said to have a home near Boca Grande in a place called Hightown, where he could enjoy the peace and quiet of island life. Since peace and quiet are not compatible with the rowdy behavior of drunken sailors, Jose would drop his crew off at Lowtown before heading home to put up his feet and catch up on the Kardashians. I heard as many laughs as groans. So. So Gaspar's crew had a reputation. He needed men who could endure the harshest conditions and also follow his most malicious orders. So he would hire criminals. He would hire mercenaries. He would hire men that had been enslaved on the vessels he captured. And by hire, I mean he gave them the choice, work for Jose or swim with Davy Jones. So, now, nothing remains today of Lowtown. But since the 1960s, there have been numerous reports of visitors to the island finding freshly dug holes, discarded tools, and even splintered debris that they always say, oh, that's the remains of a treasure chest. And in addition to that, you also have the sightings and the stories of the unexplained. Those are the agonized wails, the ghostly laughter, the distant music, disembodied screams, and shadow figures that dart between the trees. There's just, it would make sense given that Lowtown was a high energy, low moral place, for pirates. There is just one problem with this. Lowtown did not exist, and neither did Jose Gaspar. So Jose Gaspar was a fictional character that was created in 1913 by Pat Lemoyne. He was a publicist for the Charlotte Harbor and Northern Railway Company, and he penned the story of Gasparilla as a promotional brochure for the company's latest luxury hotel, the Gasparilla Inn. Now this pamphlet was distributed nationwide. It brought a lot of Northerners down. They wanted to learn more. They wanted to stay in the home of Gasparilla. Now, a decade later, we began seeing Jose Gaspar recorded in actual history books. And this is effectively where the lines between fact and fiction got blurred, because the first publication was out of Massachusetts, so it would make sense that they had no idea Jose wasn't real. And so there were other books that followed that initial publication that started in 1923 that contributed to Jose's real history. So then what about the ghostly activity on Cayo Palau? That has actually been investigated and has some pretty interesting explanations. Now, the most dominant claim on Cayo Palau is the sounds of wailing. It sounds like men in agony, they're in pain, and it basically, it's a very, very common claim, so much so that it was the first thing everybody says when they visited Cayo Palau. We heard the wailing. Well, yes, there absolutely is wailing on Cayo Palau, and that is caused by the Boca Grande Bridge into Gasparilla. What's happening is that as cars are passing over the bridge, their tires are humming against the concrete. That humming is being distorted by the distance to Cayo Palau, and actually in what is a very common phenomenon known as the Doppler effect. What sounds to us like a normal car passing over a bridge sounds like tormented wailing on the island of Cayo Palau. Now, there are plenty of other claims that have been explained away by local wildlife, and also because this is a popular area for boaters. So the disembodied voices, the music, those are explained by passing vessels, and also sometimes the wind and water are flowing right. You can hear the neighboring islands, the Gasparilla and all those. If they've got restaurants or establishments, they're throwing a nice rowdy party, you can hear that from Cayo Palau. So over the years, though, the legend of Jose Gaspar has blossomed into a full-blown Florida folklore empire. And that's really hard to say, by the way. So it has inspired festivals, parades, Florida's second best football team, and many tales, many tales stretching far and wide along Florida's Gulf Coast. In fact, Gasparilla is the subject of numerous legends right here in Lee County. And here's one you may be familiar with. This is Yusepa Island. Yusepa is said to have gained its name from the very Spanish princess that haunts its shores. As the legend goes, Yusepa de Mayorga was the daughter of Martin de Mayorga, who was, oh, there's Yusepa. He was the viceroy of New Spain. That's us, by the way. So his daughter is said to have caught the eye of Jose Gaspar, and upon first sight, he fell madly in love with her. However, she wanted nothing to do with him. She wasn't interested. So he didn't like her refusing his advances. So, out of desperation, he kidnapped her and imprisoned her on Yusepa Island. Now, his idea, not quite the romantic, his idea was that he was going to wear her down, break her spirit, and eventually she had to let him. She had nowhere to go. But he underestimated her. She's a proud woman. Now, some versions of the story tell that he eventually gave up, sailed away, and left her to die alone on the island. The more popular version of the story is that in a fit of rage, he murdered her, and then he immediately regretted it and buried her respectfully on the island. So, we already know this version of events is highly unlikely because our antagonist was busy not existing. We could conclude that Yusepa met her end, as described, but at the hands of a different person, different sailor, different love-struck sailor. Historical research, however, has proven that's not the case, and I am happy to report Yusepa actually did not meet a violent or heartbreaking end, because she never existed at all. Now, Viceroy Martin de Mayorga, real person, had 2 sons and no daughters. So, how did Yusepa get its name? Now, admittedly, the story of Jose and Yusepa is a much more interesting story to tell around a campfire than what actually happened. And that story begins and ends with a man by the name of Jose Caldes. Now, Jose, he had a fishing rancho, which is basically a little fishing farm or warehouse, on Yusepa Island in the early 1800s. He referred to the island fondly as Yusepa's Island. In 1833, Jose sold the island, packed up, and returned to Cuba with his family. It's easy to understand how a language barrier or an accent, or even some of these blotchy maps, could easily have misconstrued Yusepa's Island as Yusepa. So, fun fact also about Jose Caldes is that he's really a true Florida fisherman. And what I mean by that is he could have named the island for his daughter. He could have named it for his wife. He could have named it for his lovely mother. But no, Josefa was Jose's one true love. He had a schooner named the Josefa. So, despite the lack of evidence to support a story of an imprisoned princess, there have been numerous sightings of a spectral woman wandering the shores of Josefa Island at night. Now, we could speculate that she is the spirit of a former Josefa resident who just loved their home so much they haven't been able to leave. It's also quite feasible it's one of the current residents, but I digress. Those things are falling. Okay, so I am going to throw Jose under the bus just one more time. And so I'm sure everybody knows what this is. And this is possibly one of our most popular local legends. And it surrounds the construction of Fort Myers' first paved road, McGregor Boulevard. The story goes that while dredging for shell for the road's construction, the crew accidentally unearthed over 100 skeletons, 103 to be exact. Now, construction engineer Maurice Pearl, he was unfazed, and he wasn't going to let this stop him. So he pushed his men forward. He said, just keep going. And that's what they did. The unearthed bones were tossed in with the shell and sand that was collected at Sword Point. And it is said that those bones are still under McGregor to this day.
Where? Because I didn't know.
That is actually an excellent question. So how they did this, and unfortunately this is how a lot of our roads are because it tears up our tires, but the shell was actually used as a mix to lay the foundation on which the asphalt was pressed. So it's possible that that particular load of bones ended up in one area, or it's possible that it just got spread all through a longer distance. But excellent question because I want to know too. So many believe that because of the desecration of the grave, it has created a lasting scar on McGregor Boulevard. It has an eerie reputation of restless spirits buried within its base. There are reports of ghostly apparitions walking McGregor at night, cellular dead zones, and a lot of the houses that line McGregor have actually reported paranormal activity. McGregor is literally haunted from the ground up. Now, as the tale continues, Maurice Pearl himself became tormented by apparitions and plagued by his own guilt. He fled Florida for his home state of Michigan, and then disappeared entirely, never to be seen again. Today, locals claim that his ghost is still seen walking McGregor Boulevard, appearing as a lone figure on moonless nights. Cool story, right? But it is just that. It is a story. But, and I do have to say, this is another tale of real people being turned into villains for the sake of a good story. Maurice kind of doesn't deserve that reputation. And unlike some local ghost stories, this one has a lot of roots in truth. The construction of McGregor Boulevard, the story behind it is absolutely real. Maurice Pearl was brought in as the construction engineer in 1913, and he oversaw the ambitious project all the way through to its completion in 1915. He brought in tugboats, barges, and rail cars. And what they did was they went to the barrier islands. He went to the barrier islands all around Fort Myers, and he collected tons of shell and sand to act as the road's foundation. And one of these places is called Sword Point. And it's on the southern tip of Cape Coral. So, in initially digging on Sword Point, at first it was just a single human skull that rolled out of the shell, and it came to stop at one man's foot. Now, this is where they'll tell you that they said, you know what, just keep going, toss it all in. But no. There's actually, it's a well-documented event through the news press. What actually happened was panic ensued. And one reporter actually wrote that it was half an hour before the crowd could be gotten together and back to work. By the end of the first day, they had unearthed 57 human skeletons. By the end of the week, it was 103. Now, the reports do document that the men had to be pushed to continue working. I'm sure, especially back in the day, a lot of them were superstitious, and this was bad, or they were at least a little stitious. And Pearl, to his credit, immediately treated the area like a crime scene. He had his crew, once he convinced them to go back to work, he had them excavate the bodies properly. He called in F.W. Hunt, who is a popular Fort Myers photographer, and he had him document the entire event. He spoke to reporters the whole time, and he brought in Dr. William Winkler to examine the bodies and basically try to determine who they were and why they were there. Now, the findings are admittedly unsettling. Pearl writes that the bodies had all been lined up along the shoreline, and they were arranged in what appeared to be a distinct line. None of them had jewelry, weapons, clothing, or personal effects of any kind except for a single ceramic container. Pearl speculated that the remains were evidence of a massacre. And this is where public imagination starts. This is when a pretty popular story of what actually happened to those bodies began to circulate. And these were the bodies of Jose Gaspar's crew, who had been in a bloody, vicious battle with U.S. government. I guess they weren't really good at what they were doing. But one of the accounts does say, and this is pretty much where some of the darker parts of the legend come from, but thankfully it wasn't malintent, it was simply misperception. So there's a group. So it says here in one of the reports through the news press, and by the way, the news press, they were on this the whole time, and every one of their articles circulated all through Florida. So everybody knew what was going on, even before social media. So it says many of the bones were so far gone that they crumble to dust the moment they are struck with the spades, and consequently are thrown out with the shell that is to be used on the boulevard. So this is where the story of the bodies under McGregor comes from. So bodies, no. Bones, yes. Now, recently, I was happy to stumble upon another piece to the mystery itself, and that's the part of Maurice Pearl's disappearance. Now, Pearl, he did finish the project in 1915, and he returned to Benton Harbor, Michigan in 1916. The story goes that he then, one day, got up, walked out the front door, and was never seen or heard from again. Well, if anybody has not yet visited our little yellow house, I do highly recommend it. We have everything you could possibly be looking for. We're not always sure where it is, but it's there. And we have a whole section on what we call the name files. And the name files are folders that bear the names of every family that has made an impact of any kind in Fort Myers. And there's thousands of files. So you betcha there's a Pearl file. Now, in the Pearl file, I did find some papers that were donated by a man named C. Bob Pearl. I have not been able to find C. Bob on any of Maurice's family trees, but given that Maurice and his father and his uncle were construction engineers here in Lee County, I do have to kind of assume that he's related somehow, especially since he has old photographs of Maurice. And one of those photographs had handwriting on it. I'm not sure if it's Bob's or just somebody dictating one of his accounts. But he has the picture of Maurice working on McGregor Boulevard. And down here, it's written that Maurice Pearl disappeared after this job. No one ever heard of him again. Oh, really? Challenge accepted. So, actually, it really did not take a lot of digging, no pun intended, to find Maurice in future articles. So he was drafted for only a couple months before the end of World War I. There is a marriage announcement. The poor guy lost his notebook at one point. And that's a longer story, but he was accused of desertion, really. There was a package lost in the mail. But also, more importantly, the family census. This is the 1922 Michigan census, and he is still listed as, well, Morris, but he is still listed as the head of household. It's important to note that also in this time that he is said to have disappeared, his wife was having quite a few children. So, I mean, that's kind of a clue. So that's the story of McGregor Boulevard. Something to think about the next time you're cruising our Alley of Palms. And just remember, the next time traffic starts to slow down, it could always get worse. You could be at a dead stop. So, I'm here all week. Now we're going to go a short distance up the road to it's a tiny little home over on First Street. Cute little abode, some of you may have seen before. It's called the Burroughs Home.
That's not nice.
No, it's not. So the Burroughs Home is absolutely one of the crown jewels of Fort Myers. This home was built in 1901 for a man by the name of John T. Murphy. That's John over here. John? Yep, John. And this is Florida Schultz. She's another one of our pioneering women. But John Murphy over here, he was a wealthy cattle rancher, and he helped to spark a construction boom in the early 1900s. So he was quite influential in the rise of Fort Myers itself as a city. But in 1919, he'd had enough of us, and he sold the home to the Burroughs family. This is Nelson Burroughs, and he was also another prominent businessman that helped to boost construction and development here in Fort Myers. Just a few years later, in 1922, he deeded the house to the ladies that we most commonly associate with the Burroughs home, and that's Mona and Jetty Burroughs, his daughters. Now, their names still echo through not just the house's history, but the city's history, because these ladies were high class, they were high society, and they were the talk of the town. The Burroughs family, they hosted gatherings and riverfront parties that were attended by some of the biggest names in our area. That includes the Edisons, that includes the Fords, the Firestones, and even Charles Lindbergh. So when Mona passed away in 1978, she deeded the house to the city of Fort Myers. She wanted to ensure that it was preserved as a historic site. And today, It has been. It has been beautifully maintained under the care of the Uncommon Friends Foundation, who, again, they're actually working on it as we speak. I saw some pictures of construction crews there putting it back together. It is open for tours, weddings, and events, and it is a popular wedding venue. However, according to the staff, the visitors, and some unfortunate maintenance men, the house is said to, they say the house is not always empty after the last tour leaves. In the house itself, doors are said to open and close. They hear footsteps on the wood floors, even in rooms that are empty. The smell of perfume is said to waft through the halls. And there is a grandfather clock on the stairs, one of many in the house, by the way. I think every room has its own clock. But that grandfather clock has not worked in years. But once in a while, it decides to chime. And the guide that I actually spoke to myself said that for 1 week straight, for no reason at all, nobody had touched it, nobody had fixed it, they had had repairmen who could not fix it. She said for 1 week straight, that clock just started working again. So, now, some visitors have reported seeing the spectral image of a woman in a long, pale gown, standing in one of the upper windows, gazing out over the river. Now, she may be simply watching the water flow by, or she could be trying to get a message to some of these startled witnesses in the parking lot below. Jumping ahead here, she may even be the same woman that a staff member has seen sitting on the settee in the parlor. She's believed to be the woman who walks through the halls, leaving behind a trail of perfume. People who have smelled her perfume have said it's very soft, it's very floral, and it is definitely vintage. Now, real quick, I do want to jump back into science mode here. In parapsychology, we have a concept called place memory. And in place memory, when it happens, it's a moment in time that becomes trapped in our environment. It could be inside a structure, it could be energy that's being collected in the walls of the structure itself, or it could be out in the open. That's the moment in time that people say, oh, they saw something, that it didn't interact, it didn't notice them. When that energy gets triggered or released, it manifests visually, audibly, and sometimes you could smell phantom scents that have no rational origin. So often on TV or actually in life too, you hear a lot of people call these residual hauntings. And they're usually mistaken for ghosts, but there is no associated consciousness to them. And it's even possible that the people you're seeing or hearing are still alive. It's literally just a moment in time trapped on replay. Now, the opposite of a residual haunting is an apparition. An apparition is a true ghost, the ones that you most commonly see portrayed on TV and in movies. It's a discarnate entity that is conscious and has the ability to interact with you. These are the entities that will speak to you, tap you on the shoulder, mess with appliances and electronics, steal your socks out of the dryer, move your reading glasses, and watch you while you shower. You're welcome for that. You'll be thinking about that later. So the reason I bring this up is because without further information, it's possible to speculate that this woman that is seen, heard, or smelled passing through the Burroughs home could be nothing more than a memory tied to the house. She may not even be there. It's possible that at one point she was gazing out the window, perhaps that was her favorite thing to do, and now people still see her standing at that window. What I can tell you is that she is not alone in the house. So one of my favorite stories actually of the Burroughs home involves two ladies who were attending a wedding on the grounds, and they decided to take a break from the festivities and explore the house. And they went from room to room, checking out the artifacts and reading the letters, and then they got to the attic. And while they're admiring the old family photographs, suddenly the door slammed shut. They rushed to the door, they tried to open it, and it was locked from the outside. Then they heard laughter. The laughter of two little girls, two distinct voices giggling. They demanded to be let out, only to be met with more laughter. Finally, they were able to get the attention of somebody below by banging on the window and yelling for help. When those ladies were let out of the attic, they immediately complained about those children locking them in the attic. Well, you can imagine the puzzled look they got. And the staff says, "We don't have any children in attendance today." So it's possible that it is the playful spirits of Mona and Jetty. In their minds, they're still two young little girls, and they don't want to leave their home. They may not have been little girls here, but they could be now. Or it's just the neighbor's kids, you never know. So there is another story that I definitely want to include for the Burroughs home, and it's important to talk about it. And that is the story of the bathtub. So there is a bathroom upstairs, and the tub has been known to fill with water. Always on a Monday, and it never seems to overflow. There have been plumbers called in to check it. They can't figure it out. Everything checks out perfectly. There's no leaks, there's no malfunctions, there's no explanations. The staff will simply smile and say, "That's probably Mona drawing her bath." And that makes sense because at the point that these reports were being made, the Burroughs home was closed on Mondays, and it would make sense that she would rather take her bath when she's, not going to have an audience. Now, the reason I made sure to include this story is because there is currently a story circulating Fort Myers, and I'm starting to see it pop up online, and I'm trying to head it off. And that's the story that the bathtub was actually seen filling with blood. And that is nonsense. So, in fact, there is one report in which somebody said, they saw the bathtub fill with blood and there was a woman bathing in it. That is a scene ripped directly from a 2001 horror film called 13 Ghosts. And, it wasn't a great film, but admittedly it made me question my career choices. There are very few people who have actually witnessed the bathtub filling with water. Even fewer that had the opportunity to witness it. It would have to be a staff member that was in on a day off. So it's not like somebody was wandering through and said, I saw a bathtub of blood. So, and me personally, doing research here at Fort Myers, I've never heard this claim from anyone except for a tour guide from that aforementioned tour company. So, and that's around the time the story started too, is when that tour company moved in. So, I would like to point out the history of the Burroughs home itself is very well documented. It's important to note there's no reported deaths or tragic events within the walls. So I bring this up because a lot of people think that that's what causes a haunting. And that's actually not the case. What we have found, especially when we're dealing with the apparitional activity, when we're dealing with actual conscious entities, is we find them more commonly in the places that they loved in life, the places where they want to be. So, and I mean, that just kind of makes sense. So there's very little evidence to suggest that a conscious entity is ever bound or trapped to any place in particular, regardless of the circumstances of their passing. And honestly, that kind of makes sense, because if I'm ever stuck in limbo, you're going to find me living my best afterlife in a Michael's somewhere. So the same is actually true for cemeteries. So a lot of people think that, cemeteries are haunted because that's where the bodies are. I don't know if you've ever been to a cemetery at night. They're wet, they're smelly, they're humid. Why would they want to hang out there? So, and there's no doubt a cemetery can be scary and unnerving, especially at night. And it is actually true that places, especially cemeteries, can harbor negative or negative emotions or energies. And that's because the people that most commonly visit them, that's how they feel at the time. They're there, they're mourning the loss of their loved ones. So you're getting that feeling. So Fort Myers Cemetery is a good example. It is the oldest gated community in Southwest Florida. It's also the nicest because it's quiet, your neighbors mind their business, there's no HOA fees. It makes a lot of sense that people are dying to get in. The cemetery itself was established in 1888 and has since become the final resting place of over 11,000 residents. If you take a stroll or a tour amongst the stones, you will find the names of early pioneers, war veterans, and over a century's worth of residents that called Lake County home. Now, many locals have ventured past the cemetery at night, and a few brave explorers have even wandered in. They'll tell tales of hearing blood-curdling screams and seeing shadow figures. They see floating lights, they hear voices, they hear music. So those reports have been accumulating for decades. Now there is one report, or rather one story of Fort Myers Cemetery, and it comes from the 1980s. So in the early 1980s, there was a young man who lived right by Fort Myers Cemetery. He was a popular kid in high school, a star athlete. He went to North Fort Myers High, actually. And in the evenings, after school and practice were over, he would make his way home. He would make his way home along Michigan Avenue. Every day he had to pass this old cemetery. He had heard stories from his neighbors and the kids at school of the terrifying hauntings that go on at the cemetery at night. Those stories terrified him. But he was a smart kid. He would get to the cemetery and he would stop on the sidewalk right before actually entering the cemetery itself. And he would wait for a car to pass. He would race as fast as he could down that sidewalk in order to stay in the light of the car's headlights. The event, over time, he got faster, and he got faster. He didn't get braver, but he got faster. And one day, He ran himself right into the College Football Hall of Fame and then the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And his name was Deion Sanders. Coach Prime. So I do want to say, a little bit of a disclaimer here. I love my job. I end up in a lot of fascinating places, and I work with a lot of awesome people. I travel the U.S., and I conduct research, I consult with teams, I investigate places, I do a lot of different things when I'm on the road. One thing I'm not doing is I'm not running around the dark in a cemetery. Unless somebody asks really nicely. I hate the cemetery cliche. I really do. I do, for my social media and my website, I do a lot of short videos. I go to different places that have urban legends and stories of the paranormal, and I will tell the stories and I will tell the history. But that's the thing, is when I'm doing my videos, yes, I end up in a lot of cemeteries then, but I'm only telling the story if I've got the facts to go along with it. I'm not chasing Casper at night with a flashlight. As an investigator, I avoid them. However, I have personally investigated Fort Myers Cemetery. It was a legitimate case. I worked with the city and local law enforcement, and there was a team called in also out of Collier that I worked with on this case. And each time, we spanned it out over 2 separate days. We spaced it out, and each time we started late in the afternoon so that we could get our readings and our bearings both during the day and at night. And, it's bad enough the cemetery is a cliche. We did it at night because that's when the claims were. So we recorded and we filmed and we took our measurements, and we did absolutely stick a camera on Edgar. So the popular story about Mr. Edgar Watson here is, I hear he's a holy man. For those who don't know Edgar's history, he was shot by literally every person in town down in Chokoloskee. So his grave, he's said to rise up out of his grave at night and chase people from the cemetery. I'm happy to report that while we were there, Edgar was on his best behavior. Those who have witnessed activity, they report shadows, they report floating balls of light. They don't report anything that's detailed enough to say, oh, it looked like Edgar. So that's just another one of those tales that they blame him because he's the popular guy in town. Now, I did interview a police officer. She had an interesting story there. The only person I know of who has seen an actual detailed apparition, and she was a police officer that was on patrol in the area, and she came across this little girl. This little girl was in the back of the cemetery, and she stopped. She talked to her for a little while, and then the little girl says to her, she says, well, I gotta go home now. And the little girl turned around, walked away, and then faded away. So we do not have any clue who that was, but this is a person who had been in law enforcement for a very long time, who had worked with my mother, who was in law enforcement, and she was a reliable witness. I am also happy to report that we were able to confirm a lot of the claims collected during our initial research. The blood-curdling screams of a woman are said to be heard at night throughout the cemetery. These are coming from the residents who live around the cemetery itself. So, and we were able to determine what those are. Oh, wrong way. I mean, if I hadn't had to deal with that claim in the past, that freaked me out. And I've actually seen police officers run from that. So that's great. So the other claims that were frequent around the neighbors is the sound of a baby crying. That's another one I commonly get on an investigation. And I recognize this one in particular because I had feral cats at my old house and I had to hear that at 3 in the morning. So, now a lot of the other claims were shadow figures, floating lights, voices, music. Those had a surprising explanation. So, our team was set up. If you're familiar with Fort Myers Cemetery, you come in right here. And this is a maintenance building up here. So we had our base camp right here. It was basically an awning, tables, lots of wires. And it no sooner got dark on the first night, and we watched a car pull in through the gate, shut off its lights, and proceed to go all the way back to the back side, the darkest side of the cemetery. Well, they really weren't expecting us to be there, so when they saw us and we waved at them, they flipped around and peeled out of there. We dealt with that all night long. Cars would come in the gate, turn off their lights, and just roll to the back of the cemetery. So, yeah, they weren't there to buy coffee. We have a pretty good idea of what they were doing there, and yes, the police department's aware of it. We worked with them, handing over license plates. But towards the end of the second night, we had pretty much covered everything, and we were wrapping up. And here it comes again. There's a little blue sedan, comes in the gate, shuts off its lights, and starts heading to the back of the cemetery. Here we go again. So we flashed our lights and waved, and the car just kept going. And that's when I realized, well, wait a minute. If they go all the way to the back, you've got an equipment stand back there with lots of expensive equipment mounted on it. And I'm on a budget. I'm going to risk life and limb for that equipment. So I take off running. And I come up this way here, and I'm trying to head off this car. I'm flashing my lights, I'm waving. There was another investigator with me, and he came across, and he comes up this way. And I can see him clearly out of the corner of my eye. We're trying to stop this car. And finally, he does get the car's attention, and she turned around real fast and ran back out of there. We grabbed the equipment, we're headed back, and the other two investigators that were at base camp, they're running right towards us. And they're all riled up, and they're both talking at the same time, and they're like, where did he go? Where's the man? Where did that man go? Did he hurt you? Are you okay? What are you talking about? So, I didn't see this, which makes it even more interesting. They did. What they saw was that as I turned that corner to head up towards the back of the cemetery, they saw a man come out of the darkness and come running towards me. So as he closed the distance, he reaches out to grab me, and I run right through him, and he disappears. This was not a trick of the light. They told me that he was tall, he was very thin, he was wearing long pants and a button-down shirt that looked like it could be a work shirt. He had long hair pulled back in a ponytail that was either very light blonde or gray, and that they watched him come down that street and try to grab me. Well, great, now I have to amend my report. So, I have been very happy, actually, to dismiss most of what was going on at the cemetery, but that was not something I could dismiss. So, there we go. My bad. But, so these stories and ghost stories in general, they remind us of the same truth, and that's that the past is not always gone. It lingers. As historians and researchers, we owe it to both the living and the dead to separate fact from fiction, to dig into the historical record, and to honor the stories that time hasn't quite yet erased. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, history has a way of haunting us all.